Happy Training Tuesday. Welcome to Tuesday night. It is another Training Tuesday, and tonight, I love this topic because tonight we're talking about perfectionism. So, the theme tonight is to stop chasing the unicorns. Why? Well, partly because they don't exist. Actually, mainly because they don't exist. I called tonight Stop Chasing Unicorns, Ditch Perfection, Embrace Progress, because perfectionism is one of those themes that we come up against repeatedly when we coach together. So, for those of you who've been with me when I've talked about imposter syndrome and the 5 different imposter profiles, the perfectionist imposter profile is the most common one that you women tell me is your biggest challenge. This idea of perfectionism. And we do, and I said so in some of the promos for this, and I think it's only fair that we call it out and we acknowledge it. We wear it a little bit as a badge of honor, don't we? We do. As much as we know that our perfectionist and our perfectionism tendencies can hold us back, can challenge us, can stress us out, we also look at it as it's a good thing. So think about the last time you were in a job interview. And I know a lot of you are out there job hunting. I know the market's a little bit weird right now. But as you get into the interviews, there are those ever annoying questions that the interviewers always ask you, and they do, tell me about your strengths. Why should we hire you for the job? And a lot of times we'll say things like, well, I've got 20 years experience. I've done this job before. I've done it brilliantly. I know how to manage people. I have all these brilliant ideas, right? What are my strengths? My strengths, I'm organized. I have experience. Um, People like me. I like people. I know how to influence. I know how to get the job done. And then they ask, tell me about your weaknesses. What do you think your greatest weakness is? And we go, oh, gosh, I think my greatest weakness would be I'm just a little bit of a perfectionist. How many of you have said that? How many of you in a job interview, in some sort of conversation along those lines, say, but we say it, but we don't really mean it. We don't, and by saying we might mean that we are perfectionists, we don't really mean it's a challenge. We don't really mean it's a weakness. It's a bit of a badge of honor. Well, I work so hard to get things just right. Therefore, right? Therefore, I am a perfectionist. Therefore, that is what this is. That is what this means. But the truth is, if we're honest with ourselves and if we're honest with what perfectionism means, then the truth is it does hold us back. And I had to open another window. I see that Jackie's here. I see that Katerina's here. Hello, welcome. And yes, you have you said that. Honestly, Katerina, 99% of us have said at some point, I'm a perfectionist, typically in that scenario of the job interview. So I'm going to tell you right now, not all the comments are coming up on my main screen. I can see them on a different screen. So if I'm looking down, that's why. And hopefully those comments will keep rolling in so I can see them. All right. So that scenario is a little bit of what got me thinking about the whole, how do we even define it? How do we define like what's perfect? The perfect life, the perfect job. How do we define that? How do we decide the merit of it? And when we start thinking about how we define perfectionism and the merit of it, what we're really talking about is judging. Who's judging? Who's deciding that it's perfect or not perfect? Who's judging us as being successful or not successful? Right? Where does that all come from? And hey, Joyce, good to see you. I'm glad you're here. All right, so for those of you joining us for the first time, welcome to Training Tuesday. My name is Natalie Hahn, and I am your coach and trainer tonight. And we are here in our group, Accelerating Leadership for Professional Women, to talk about all things about leadership and confidence building and using our voices and really owning being the CEO of our career and of our lives. Perfectionism is one of those things that gets in our way a lot of the time. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And you're absolutely right, Katerina. We judge us. We are our own worst critics, which means we have to be thinking about what is it that we decided was perfect? What is that bar? What does it look like? Is it real? Right? I started this with the whole reason we call this Stop Chasing Unicorns is because they're not real. The bar is different for every person, and there is no such thing as perfection. And like logically, we know this. We just don't feel it, and not feeling it is not our fault. Right? You are not to blame for being a perfectionist. We were raised this way. We were trained to be perfectionists. Think about this. In the United States, between kindergarten and 12th grade, right? So the school system in the United States, we go through 112 standardized tests. 112 standardized tests between kindergarten and 12th grade. What message does that send? Everybody trying to get a perfect score. Everybody studying to the test. Right? There are all kinds of elements in our education, in our society, in our families. How should I look? How should I dress? How should I speak? How should I behave? How can I avoid being a failure? Well, whose definition of failure? Whose definition of what looks good and what doesn't look good? Whose definition of good manners versus bad manners? Perfectionism is about perfecting an imperfect self. We know we are imperfect beings. We know we are prone to make mistakes. We know that's human nature. Human nature is full of errors. Our genetic code is full of errors. Our learning, that's how we learn, it's full of errors, right? And yet, we hold this concept of perfection, and what it's really all about is perfecting an imperfect self. So that definition, perfectionism is about perfecting an imperfect self, comes from Thomas Curran, who's written a book, and now I can't remember the name of it, and I should have written it down, but Thomas Curran has written a book about perfectionism and working through it, right? How to kind of conquer that, manage that part of yourself. But I think that's the piece you have to remember, because we put ourselves in this cycle of self-defeat because it's not attainable. We try something, we fail at it. We try again, we fail at it. We keep trying because we keep telling ourselves that if we keep trying, we're going to get it perfect the next time. And we create this ongoing syndrome of trying to attain perfection that isn't attainable. Now, that is a different message than try again and you'll succeed. You might succeed, but at some point in your trying, you have to decide what's success. And is it 100% perfect, or is 80% good enough, right? Is 80% good enough? Joyce, I love you. I did not know the unicorn was the national animal of Scotland, and given that they're the home of Nessie, the Loch Ness monster, of course it is. I love that. I love that. Leave it to the Scots. I do have some Scots heritage, so I'm going to claim that. That's awesome. And yes, Katerina, you're absolutely right. The root of a lot of this perfectionism is comparison, because we always find ourselves lacking when we compare to somebody else who we think does have it right. And we have no idea what the evidence is, what the flaws are, like what else is going on with them that makes their lives as imperfect as ours. But that's what we do. That's where our brains go. So I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about one of my favorite topics, which is Greek mythology, because the Greeks knew a little bit of something about this. So how many of you know the story of our friend Sisyphus? Sisyphus. Do we know the story of Sisyphus? I'm going to give you a very brief synopsis because I want to get to the important part, which is Sisyphus was a king of Corinth who was known for being kind of a murderous jerk. So He was known for defying the laws of just good citizenry and good hospitality, which is when somebody comes into your kingdom and they're visiting. Katerina, you're Greek. Well, congratulations. Then you're going to forgive me for condensing this the way that I am. So yeah, so he murdered people when he shouldn't have because they were visiting, and so hospitality was not a thing with him. Twice he tricked Hades and Zeus in a whole death scenario, and finally they were like, "We're tired of this guy Sisyphus, and when he dies, we've got a punishment for him." He had, because of his trickery and his smarts, he had extreme pride, which the word we use, right, coming from the Greeks, is hubris. Thought he was equal to or even better than the gods. And it got him in trouble to the point where they said, you know what, dude, when you die, here is your punishment. Your punishment is you're going to roll this giant boulder up a hill. Boulder up a hill. And as soon as you get to the top of the hill, it's going to roll back down. And you got to roll it back up over again. And his eternity is constantly rolling the boulder back up the hill. And as soon as it gets to the top and he succeeds, it rolls all the way back down. And he has to do it again forever and ever and ever. And this is what we do to ourselves when we are striving for perfect. We are striving for that unachievable goal of getting it up the hill and hoping it stays, but it doesn't. It rolls back down the hill. And in our quest for perfectionism, we become Sisyphus. So, I was a lit major, and Albert Camus wrote a book called The Myth of Sisyphus. Now, for those of you who know Camus, you might know him more because it's somewhere in high school or college they made you read The Stranger, which was his whole book on fatalism and whatnot. Well, in the book The Myth of Sisyphus, he wrote that Sisyphus is the ideal absurd hero. That was the phrase he used, the ideal absurd hero. And that this whole pushing the boulder up the hill and it rolling all the way back down the hill and you have to push it up again is an example of the human condition. Because it is our human beings, it is our persistent struggle against life. Now, you guys have heard me say that as much as we try to control things, because we think if we can just control this thing here and this thing here, life is going to be perfect and it's going to be smooth and everything's going to be good. And the truth is we have no control. Life is always going to throw something at you, right? There's always going to be somebody getting sick or an accident that happens or you lose your job, right? Something is always going to happen. And part of our human condition is to respond to that, to figure out, to make our life up with the proactive actions that we take and then our responses to the stuff out of our control that life throws at us. Now, what's interesting about Camus in this book, in his whole myth of Sisyphus, is that his perspective is the only alternative to being thoroughly depressed, the only alternative to being thoroughly depressed, that the boulder keeps rolling back down the hill and you keep after rolling it back up, because that just makes eternity a slog. The only alternative then is to rebel. And how do you rebel? You rebel by rejoicing in the fact. In rejoicing, in celebrating the fact that I get to roll it up the hill again. It's a joyful acceptance that this is what it is, that this is what I'm dealing with, and this is how I'm going to deal with it. And this is how we gain definition and identity for who we are as human beings and how we choose to live our life. We do not have control over the boulder rolling down the hill. We cannot achieve perfection thinking we're always going to push it up there and it's going to stay and it's going to be great. What we can do is control how we show up every time we push it up the hill. Because what's the alternative? What happens if every time you're pushing the boulder up the hill, trying to get it to stay, trying to get it perfectly balanced at the top of the hill, what happens if every time it rolls back down, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're sad? What happens to you every time? You know because you do this a bit already. How do you feel? Right? Let me know in the chat. When you are struggling for perfection and you just can't get there, where do you go? Where does your head go? What are the words that pop into your mind when you think about that? I know where you go because I coach you guys on perfectionism when we have our one-on-one sessions, and when I do group classes, we talk about this a lot either, right? Because the number one result of perfectionism is burnout. We get burnt out because we're exhausted. That energy going into the frustration and the anger and the constantly fighting the uphill battle and not celebrating the uphill battle, we get burnt out. Now, here's the thing. Burnout rates 2024 are up. Suicide rates are up. The idea, oh, that's a good one, Rochelle. And hello, welcome. Degradation is a word that comes from, right? We feel defeated, we feel degraded, we feel not good enough because we can't seem to get there, because we've set this standard that we can't get to. Which leads to the burnout rates are up, the suicide rates are up. What's really interesting is that since the 1980s, our judgment of success being material wealth has gone up 20%. Since the 1980s, between the 1980s and now, we have decided that being rich is a life goal that's worth striving for. That's increased 20%. And then we have the battle of social media, right, that puts it all out there and all the perfect filters and blurs, and we're only capturing that beautiful moment at the beach or that vacation moment in the mountains, and we're not sharing the day-to-day grind of rolling the boulder up the hill. So we have this whole other layer of perfection out there that is so unreal, and certainly it's unattainable on a daily basis. And yet on a daily basis, what are we scrolling through, right? What are we seeing and comparing ourselves against? Things that aren't real, unicorns, right? Things that aren't real. So there are three types of perfectionism, sort of three lenses of perfectionism. The first one is self-oriented perfectionism, which is I am being as perfect as I can be. The effort around this type of perfectionism is me focused on being as perfect as I can be, as I define perfectionism based on maybe how I was raised and all of that. Second type of perfectionism is socially prescribed. Socially prescribed, and this comes from Thomas Curran, by the way, who I noted earlier, who wrote the book. This comes from him. Socially prescribed perfectionism is, this is what others demand of me. This is a standard that we mostly assume that other people expect or want from us, and that's how we achieve perfect. Socially prescribed. The third type of perfectionism is what we call other-oriented. So there's self-oriented, all about me, socially prescribed, this is what society commands of me, and other-oriented. Other-oriented is other people should be perfect. We get into that other-oriented mode a lot of times when we're applying judgment to other people because we're thinking, I work so hard at this and getting this right, why can't they do it too? Why aren't they working as hard as me? Why aren't they getting this right the way I'm getting this right? Because I worked hard to do this, they can too. So it's the judgment we apply to others, and we usually apply it to others because we apply it to ourselves. Now, the most damaging one, the most prevalent one, and the most damaging one is socially prescribed. The thought that others demand this perfectionism of me. My parents expect me to be the perfect daughter, to be a doctor when I grow up, right? These ideas that we have to please other people in order to be accepted, be loved, be safe. Rochelle, you're right. It sounds like working for a corporation to the full. It does, right? The corporation has certain expectations of the work we're going to do, how we're going to perform it, how fast we're going to perform it, what metrics we're going to hit. And if we fail, then we're not perfect. If we fail, We don't it's either it's black and white, right? It's not we achieved a measure of success, go us, and it wasn't 100%, but we were 80% there, and look at what we learned. It's you missed your goal altogether, no bonus for you. Absolutely right. And so, Katerina, I struggle with, I'm not sure which one that comment that's related to. I still struggle with that at times, but perfectionism in general, I think we all, I would agree with you, we all struggle. We all struggle with it. And there is that judgment layer of the self-oriented, right? I put the pressure on myself to be perfect. And again, the most dangerous, other people expect it of me. The second one, the socially prescribed, all three of these, self oriented, socially prescribed, and other oriented, have increased, have doubled actually since 1989. So I don't know what Kool Aid we were drinking in the 80s. I should remember because I was alive then, but whatever we were soaking in the 80s has resulted in this idea of perfectionism being so much more prevalent. So since 1989, the number of college students who felt the pressure of, is particularly the socially prescribed perfectionism, doubled, and it's expected to increase by another 30% by the time we get to 2050. We're just layering on the societal expectations of a perfect life, a perfect career, a perfect family, and all the images of what that looks like. And this is not a growth trend that we should be embracing, right? This is one that literally is going to kill us, between the burnout and the stress, which is going to cause health issues, which causes happiness issues, which leads us to depression and anxiety that does take us to the point of suicide, right? Not a trend we want to embrace. Perfectionism literally can be deadly, which is why the more awareness we have of when we are putting this pressure on ourselves, when we are accepting societal pressures and saying, yes, that's the accepted norm, therefore I have to strive for that, incredibly dangerous to us personally as well as to us as a society. So, kind of a dark turn I'm taking, isn't it, for a topic titled Don't Chase Unicorns. Um, but it's a serious one. And and one of the hardest parts of this is breaking away from the societal expectations, is being able to recognize that just because work expects this of me, my family expects this of me, my friend group, my community expects this of me, doesn't mean I should deliver it. What we're really asking you to do, what I'm really asking you to look at, is the practice of self compassion that allows you to say, this might be a little too much, and that's okay. I can walk away. It's the limiting of the self criticism where you are running these negative thoughts in your head that lead you to a place that says, I'm never going to get this right. If I don't get it right, nobody's going to appreciate me. I'm not a good worker. I'm not a good daughter. I'm not a good sister. I'm not a good friend. One really great way to flip the script on this when you find yourself in that spiral of beating yourself up because it's not quite right is to remind yourself if this were my best friend coming to me with this problem, how would I respond to her? And I know that's an old practice. That's like not something new and shiny you're just learning tonight, but I want to remind you to apply that lens, because if you can practice the self-compassion for yourself, then you can do it for others. Because the flip is true. When we are judging other people, when we are very judgmental of other people because we think, oh, that person's stupid, or oh, that person's so out of shape, oh, that person is so flaky. When we judge other people, what we're calling out, what we're showing and highlighting to the world is where we ourselves feel the most insecure. And you've heard me talk about this before. For me, for the way I was raised, for the judgment and the values I've brought to the table and into my adult life, and for how I raised my kids, the number one judgment that used to come out of my mouth, and it still happens, I'll be honest, it still happens occasionally, but the number one judgment that would come out of my mouth was always, oh, they're so, oh, my light just went out. ah, they're so stupid. They're so stupid because my biggest fear, the biggest judgment in my family was always academics, grades. Are we intelligent? Are we smart? Parents didn't care if I was musical or into drama or athletic. What they cared about was, did I make good grades? And so the judgment that I grew up with was all about, are we smart or not? And it was only when I got older and had kids and I heard my kids parroting, oh, they're so dumb. Oh, they're such an idiot, that I thought, ooh, ooh, that's a judgment that I gave them. I taught them that. And exposed the fact that that was a value, that high achievement value that I was putting on the table was not coming from a healthy place. And we need to reframe that. So when you can look at how you're judging others, and remember that's how you're judging yourself. When you can show more compassion to yourself, it's okay if I make mistakes. It's okay if I'm not the smartest person in the room. It's okay if I open my mouth and put my foot in it occasionally, which I do because I'm human and we all do that. And I will get better. I will learn how to do that a little bit less. I will learn to pay more attention to what people are saying or doing, etc. It's a learning process. So, more self-compassion leads to more compassion for others. You do it for yourself, you do it for others. Second thing you can do to start minimizing the perfectionism is embracing the mistakes. It's looking at failure, at missing targets, as not as a weakness, but as a learning opportunity. So it really is shifting your mindset. Like I just said, sticking my foot in my mouth. I do it. I still do it. I will say something that I think is funny or a joke, and I will just be very poorly timed, right? Or I will have missed a piece of information which made that joke that might have been funny 3 days ago, not so funny today. Or maybe it just didn't need to be said, right? So when we make those mistakes, they might be embarrassing. They might be embarrassing. We might feel like, oh my God, I look like such an idiot. But they're also learning moments. It's a reminder to me, oh, you know what? If it doesn't really need to be said, maybe I don't need to be the one who says it, right? Maybe I need to take a beat, and before I throw out that snippy comment that's such a great joke, maybe I need to just take a beat and think, could this upset somebody? Could this offend somebody? Does it need to be said? Is it kind? Is it necessary, right? You run through, is it true? You run through the tenets of how we present good speech. If we can make a habit of reflecting on what we've learned from our setbacks, then suddenly making mistakes and failure doesn't become so scary. It becomes, I've been down this path before. I know how not to go down this path again. Let me try this path, and I will learn something different. Because we have to consider, like, what is good enough? Who defined good enough? How do we step away from the fear of making a wrong decision? Because most of the time there is no wrong decision, it's just a decision. And based on what happens after you make that decision, you then make the next decision. But you can't make the next decision if you don't make the first one. This is how perfectionists in particular get stuck in analysis paralysis, because they keep trying to figure out what's the perfect decision to make. And what ends up happening is they're paralyzed. They don't make any decision. And now, perfectionists are some of the world's biggest procrastinators. They put off doing the thing because they can't do it perfectly. So then it doesn't get done. Well, maybe when I have more information, maybe when I understand this better, then I'll be ready to make the decision. Then my schedule will be perfect and I can go to that class. Then I will have saved enough money and I can go do that thing. When you are a perfectionist, you wait for all the planets to align and for all the elements to be perfect before you go make the choice and do the thing. And so you don't even get to make the mistake, and you don't get to fail because you never do it. And then the failure is much bigger because you never did the thing anyway. I feel like as I'm talking that through, I might be talking in circles. So let me know in the chat if you're still with me on that one. Joyce, the 80s gave us Wall Street. They did. They did give us Wall Street Share, Jane Fonda, exercise videos, Oh, you're right. You're right. You're right. It was the rise of, and it was the rise too of, at the time, an economy that was booming, and so suddenly it became affordable to some extent to have all the things. And we really did get a lot of class status, I think, out of material wealth in that era. I think that's true. With mass collaboration, Rochelle, with mass collaboration, we can change the outlook. And absolutely true. Absolutely true. And part of that mass collaboration is somebody needs to lead, right? Somebody needs to lead. And so that's what I would invite you to do. If you're going to reframe making mistakes into lessons that are learned and not feel embarrassed about the fact that they're going to happen, because you're going to happen. We are imperfect beings. There's no way we get through life without making mistakes. So if we can accept that's going to happen, take a breath and say, okay, maybe that sucked. Maybe I wish that didn't happen, but what am I going to do to move forward? And not paralyze ourselves into, I don't know what to do next because I don't have the perfect answer. Then what you're also doing is you're modeling a way to lead for yourself and for others who can join you into this reframe that says imperfection is beautiful. Imperfection is normal. It's the way things should be. Because who decides what's truly perfect? Who decides what's truly unique? And what if the mistake that was made led to something else that was truly amazing and wonderful and that we wouldn't have if the mistake wasn't made? And you know what's so ridiculous? The first thing that popped in my mind as I said that was the story of the origins of the Caesar salad. Do you know origins of the Caesar salad? It was a mistake. There was a Italian restaurant, it's still there, in San Diego that catered to the sailors. And I think the owner's name was Caesar. I don't think the restaurant's name was Caesar, but I think the owner of the restaurant, his name was Caesar. And he was catering to the sailors, and there was a big weekend, I don't know, it was Easter weekend, I think it was, something like that. And he had all these sailors in with their families dining and having this great meal. And he had the house salad was the typical and was the well-known salad at this restaurant. He had the house salad, and he ran out. So people are ordering off the menu and he can't give them what they ordered. So he had to go back in his kitchen and figure out, well, what can I give them? And he had romaine lettuce, and he had some anchovy paste, and he had some Parmesan cheese and some croutons. He basically, on the fly, in the middle of his busiest day of the year, made up the Caesar salad and walked around on a push cart and said, I know you wanted the house salad, but I made something special just for you. And on the cart, tossed the salad, made it fresh for every patron who ordered the salad. And the Caesar salad is born. And not only is it one of the most popular salads, it's the one they charge you more for. It was a mistake. It was a mistake. So how do you decide what's perfect? When you look at the world of art, how do you know what's perfect? Did Picasso make a mistake? When you think about how Picasso's work evolved and went into Cubism, is it a mistake that the woman's head is sideways and that her boob is over here on her ear? Is it a mistake or is it art? Did Dali make a mistake? Are the melting clocks an error? Right? How do we decide? Why do we pay more for the handmade coffee cups, none of which are the same color quite or quite the same size, or the handles aren't quite right, than we do for the perfectly matched set that we can get at Target for $20? Because we do understand the value of imperfect. We do understand that imperfect, natural, has its own beauty, has its own worth, and has its own value. We just haven't learned yet how we apply it to ourselves. So that's what I would like to invite you to do. How do you start applying the idea that imperfect is beautiful, that it's valuable, that it's worth something? How do we reframe the imperfect birthday cake that you made into, this is the most amazing thing I could have done for my partner? How do you reframe the piece of art that you went to class to try to learn how to do watercolors, and you're looking at it going, oh my God, this is a mess. about, looking at everybody else. And yet, it's the most beautiful gift your mother ever got from you. What do we have? Rochelle, what do you think? You're thinking about marketing? What are we marketing? I'm sorry, I have to see if I can see the other comments, Rochelle. Are you thinking about perfectionism in marketing? Because as somebody who's in marketing, that's definitely where we get stuck. This idea that we can't release something to the public, right? That we can't release something to sales until it is 100% perfect. And this is where I get a little bit into my background of being in startup companies, which is where we live by the 80-20 rule. Like, get it 80% good, get it out the door, or we'll never make progress. Um, but I have to say, oh, you're talking about the origins of the Caesar salad, aren't you? I might be going on a completely different tangent than you. It's not letting me see the comments. I'm sorry. Suddenly it stopped. All right. I'm going to leave you with this on this Training Tuesday, which is 3 ways to be thinking about how can I minimize my own sense of this perfectionism that's going to stress me out, burn me out. It's going to make me cranky. It's going to increase my anxiety. How do I minimize that so that I can show grace not just to myself, but to the rest of the world? One is practicing the self-compassion. Where do I find myself judging others and judging myself the most? And how do I practice being a kinder, more compassionate, nicer version of me? How do I be more forgiving of those flaws that I judge in myself? That will allow you to be less judgmental of other people. 2, how do I embrace mistakes, errors, things that didn't go quite right? How do I look at those as true learning opportunities? How do I reframe that? And yes, how do I acknowledge that it sucked? I didn't hit my target. I didn't hit my bonus. I didn't make the goal. But here's what I did do. Here's what I did achieve. Here's what I did learn. Here's how I know I'm going to do it differently next time. And 3, how do we reframe imperfect into something that we value, into something that's beautiful, into something that is still an accomplishment? So I want you to reframe the value of imperfect. I want you to reframe the mistake or the failure as a learning. And I want you to reframe the judgment as an opportunity to forgive and to show compassion. All right. Thank you for joining me tonight for talking about the unicorns, because we're not moving to Scotland today. And we're not chasing unicorns anymore. We're going to focus on letting go of this idea that our perfectionism is this badge of honor. It's not the weakness in the job interview that we're somehow turning into a superpower and a strength, because this idea of perfectionism will absolutely burn us out. It is a little feature in our brain that makes us judge ourselves and others, that we're going to flip around and say there's a better way to think about this. There's a better way to do this. And if I do this for myself, I can invite the others to join in and do it with me. Thank you, ladies, for joining me on Training Tuesday. As always, my favorite night of the week. I really appreciate being here with you. I appreciate you guys being here. And I will look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Have a fabulous week.